Things took a surprisingly serious turn when Joe Neguse stepped into the spotlight and began questioning FBI Director Kash Patel, not with theatrics, but with precision. What started as a discussion about a tragic school shooting in Colorado quickly shifted into something far more uncomfortable. Neguse didn't raise his voice, didn't grandstand, but his questions cut straight through the noise, zeroing in on Patel's financial disclosures and recent stock investments in a semiconductor company. And just like that, the room changed. Because this wasn't just about policy anymore. It was about perception, power, and accountability. Neguse carefully laid out the timeline of Patel's transactions, raising a broader concern that's been simmering in Washington for years. Should top officials in positions of immense influence be trading individual stocks at all? Patel tried to frame his actions as routine and compliant with DOJ guidelines, but the underlying tension was impossible to ignore. This moment wasn't explosive, but it was controlled, deliberate, and potentially far more damaging in the long run.
Gentleman yielding. With that, we now recognize the gentleman from Colorado.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing. Thank you, Director Patel, for being here today. I have a couple of questions regarding a terrible shooting that occurred in Colorado, a state, as you may know, that I represent. You've testified previously about, I think, what you would describe as your efforts to provide more information regarding the investigation with respect to the horrific assassination of Mr. Kirk. And so, in that same vein, I'm hoping you can provide this committee and my constituents in Colorado with some clarity.
Absolutely.
I think, as my colleagues know, in Evergreen, Colorado, Jefferson County, a county that I proudly represent, at Evergreen High School, a shooter ultimately injured. 2 students were praying for their swift recovery. There's an article here from Colorado Public Radio. The title is, quote, FBI was already investigating an account that may have been linked to the Evergreen shooter. You're familiar with the circumstances generally, Director, regarding this terrible tragedy.
Yes.
So my understanding from the public reporting is that an organization reported to the FBI in July of this year regarding, just reading here from the article, that the FBI opened an assessment into a social media account user whose identity was unknown and who was discussing the planning of a mass shooting with threats nonspecific in nature. This is the FBI's statement to the press. And that the FBI continued to work this assessment investigation to identify the name and location of the user up until September 10th, 2025, which was the day of the tragedy. Can you provide us some clarity on what were the impediments to finding, the account user, and maybe describe in greater detail the FBI's work in that regard?
Generally speaking, yes, because I know even though the shooter's deceased, the investigation we're not done.
Sure.
And so the impediments to finding these individuals, and you highlight a great point. We had 2 huge tragedies in the span of days in this country. The school shooting in Evergreen, Colorado being one of them. And proactively going out onto these social media platforms, which are so large, is our biggest impediment. And we need to rely on the service providers. There's actual legislation, I can't remember the name of it, that's up for renewal, which will, and I think at the end of the month, which gives service providers the ability to report that information in from their end without liability. We need that to continue, because while the FBI has so many people and the police are great at doing it, there's just too many platforms to cover down on.
Well, I appreciate that, Director Patel, and I think I'm interested in continuing this conversation, because I think the reporting suggests that there's a pattern, and that ultimately, we want to make sure that law enforcement is able to prevent this kind of tragedy from happening in the future. I have a question. It's not meant as a gotcha question, so it just frame it there. But it is in regards to some reporting around a periodic transaction report that you had filed earlier, this year. So this is in July, pursuant to the ethical obligations as a senior executive official. You remember filing that in July?
Yes.
Yeah. So in that report, as best as I can surmise, you disclosed that you divested, $100,000 or more in a variety of different stocks,
right,
which I presume was pursuant to the ethics agreement that you negotiated with the Department of Justice. In that same report, there's a disclosure regarding purchases of 2 different well, rather two different transactions. So between $15,000 to $50,000 in a national coffeehouse chain and between $50,000 to $100,000 in a semiconductor company on May 9th and May 12th. Are those transactions that you're doing personally, or are these through a stockbroker, or are these transactions that you're handling yourself?
So how they happen is I submit proposals under DOJ guidance to say, hey, I would like to trade this or that. And they run their review, and the FBI runs a review, and then they come back and say yes or no, and then I make the transaction.
Is there a reason that you decided to make the purchases into those two companies?
Generally speaking, before I got this job, I was, trading stocks, but not a lot, like most people, and I just follow certain industries, and I thought they would be a good investment.
So the reason why I ask, right, because you had divested in other companies,
yeah.
And I presume that wasn't because there were actual conflicts. It's just that you wanted to avoid an appearance of impropriety.
It was both.
Both,
Yeah.
But not all of the companies were conflicts.
Whatever they make
divested from.
I don't make the call; they make the call.
Sure.
Yeah.
I guess my point would be, the reason why I ask is, why I said it's not a gotcha question. I have for years led an effort here in Congress to try to ban members of Congress, senior executive officials, from trading stocks. And it's bipartisan in nature. We're working really hard to get that done, Republicans and Democrats. And you can understand, I think, sure, given your role, given the nature of the position that you hold as the leader of the largest law enforcement agency in our country, that divesting entirely, not doing day trading now, I think would be something that would be in the interest of the American people. So I just would hope you would consider that, and that moving forward, that perhaps not purchasing stocks in individual companies, I would think would be something that would be worth pursuing.
Gentleman's time is...
I'm happy to give the witness an opportunity to...
Sure.
No, thank you. I'll work with you on it.
Gentleman from...
What made this exchange particularly compelling wasn't volume or theatrics. It was the quiet precision of Joe Neguse's approach and the implications behind every question he asked. He didn't come in swinging wildly or trying to score a viral moment. Instead, he methodically built a narrative, starting from a real-world tragedy in Colorado and then pivoting into a much broader issue, trust in leadership. By grounding his questioning in a recent school shooting, Neguse established moral weight. This wasn't abstract politics. It was about whether institutions tasked with protecting the public are functioning effectively. But then, almost seamlessly, he shifted the focus toward Kash Patel's financial activity, and that's where things became far more politically sensitive. Because once the conversation moved into stock trading, especially investments in specific sectors like semiconductors, it stopped being just about policy failures and started becoming about potential conflicts of interest, or at the very least, the appearance of them. And that's the key word Neguse kept circling without directly accusing: appearance. He repeatedly emphasized that his question wasn't a gotcha, but that framing almost made it more powerful. It signaled that the concern wasn't necessarily illegal behavior, it was something more subtle but equally damaging. Erosion of public trust. When someone in Patel's position, leading one of the most powerful law enforcement agencies in the world, is actively making individual stock trades, even if cleared through DOJ ethics channels, it raises unavoidable questions. Are these decisions truly independent of inside knowledge? Are they influenced even indirectly by access to sensitive information? Or maybe most importantly, does the public believe they are? Patel's defense that he followed procedure, submitted trades for approval, and simply invested based on personal judgment technically answers the question. But politically, it doesn't resolve the tension. Because in Washington, perception often matters just as much as legality. What Neguse was really doing in that moment was tying Patel's personal financial decisions into a much larger bipartisan push to restrict or outright ban stock trading among high-level officials. This wasn't just about one transaction or one company. It was about setting a standard. Neguse essentially put Patel in a position where even if everything he did was within the rules, it still might not meet the expectations of the public. And that's where the pressure subtly builds. There was no dramatic confrontation, no viral shouting match, but the underlying message was clear. The rules themselves may no longer be enough. In a political environment already saturated with distrust, even technically compliant behavior can become a liability. And that's what made this exchange so effective. It didn't explode, it lingered. It planted doubt, raised uncomfortable questions, and forced viewers to reconsider where the line should be drawn between legal conduct and ethical leadership.